At this time, I'm going to call our March 23rd special call meeting of the Baldwin County Planning and Zoning Commission to order. And if you will stand at this time, we'll have a prayer and we'll have a pledge of allegiance. Father, we're thankful to you for the day. Thank you for the blessings that you've given to us and the greatest blessing of living in this great county. Father, we thank you for all those that make this a great place. Now we ask for your guidance, oversight on this meeting tonight. Father, may we do things that honor you and show respect for each other and just be with us through this meeting. We pray this in the name of Jesus. Amen.
Amen.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, at this time, I'm going to call our roll. Brandon Bias, Robert Davis, Plumer Tonsmeyer, Jason Padgett, Michael Mullick,
Here.
Greg Seibert,
Here.
Bill Booyer,
Here.
Jamie Stradiger,
Here.
Mike McKenzie,
Here.
Rebecca Teal, Diane Burnett, and Michael Fletcher. All right, we have a quorum. Just real quickly, since we only really have one item on the agenda tonight, we're here for our vision, the Citizens Guide to Growth in Zoned Areas of Baldwin County. The way we'll do this tonight, Matthew will make a presentation to go over where we are with changes that have been made, kind of make an explanation, go through the document for us and for you, the public. We'll have an opportunity to talk with him, and then after that, then I will open the public hearing, and hopefully you signed up if you wanted to speak. If you didn't, you can go out and fill out a form. They'll get it up here to me. We'll make sure everybody gets an opportunity if you choose to speak. I would ask that you, I'll be the first, be sure you mute your phones so we're not interrupted by those. And with that, Matthew, we'll start with our item.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Planning Commissioners. We've spent a lot of time working through this document. I do want to thank all the members of the public who have come here tonight. I want to thank our county commissioners who have supported us through this process. It is a difficult process. It's the master plan, what we're calling the Citizens Guide to Growth, is a document required by state statute. And it sets forth the future vision for growth in the zoned areas of Baldwin County. These plans have a history of being sometimes contentious, and so they're never easy to navigate, and I just appreciate the way everybody has worked through this process together. We've had great working relationships with the Board of Realtors. We've met with developers. We've met with home builders. We've met with the Board of Education. We've met with many citizens through this process and through our stakeholder meetings. And then we've had several presentations and meetings with y'all, including our joint work session with y'all and the Baldwin County Commission on January 5th. So thank you for everybody who's invested so much time into this process. Just as a reminder, today we're considering the draft plan that was published online and the addendum updates for the urban area changes. All of this is online. As planning commissioners, each of y'all should have the paper copy of the updated land use map up there. And I stopped and kind of said, what would be the best way for us to address this tonight? I feel like we've published so much on this, and we've given you all so many presentations, and we've asked you to watch videos and then sit through presentations again. How do we get the most bang for our buck in terms of your time tonight as we go through this? So what I'm going to do is I have a very short PowerPoint presentation where I will hit some high points, and then we will actually go into the document, and we will go through that document kind of on a page-by-page basis and have a discussion about it and see if there's any additional input above and beyond what y'all initially had on January 5th. Between January 5th and today, the only substantive changes to the document are updating those urban areas that created the development composite map that ultimately formed the future land use map. And that's because the 2020 census, even though that took place 3 years ago approximately, the actual mapping in urban areas did not get published until January, and so those have now been incorporated into this mapping instead of using the 2010 data. All right, so just as a reminder, as we go through this item, we'll start by this page-by-page review. We'll then have the public hearing, and then we'll be looking for the Planning Commission for a vote. Quick reminder here about the 4 sections of this guide. So what does this document do? Well, Section 1 is a process overview. Section 2 covers overarching themes. Section 3 is an action playbook. And if you were participated in any of our past presentations or watched the online material, we like to think of this as the book of plays a quarterback might consider when he's facing a certain situation on the field to decide what are some options that could be utilized. So they're not mandates, they're options that could be considered based on the problems we might encounter down the road. And then the final section, which is the guide for growth, is our future land use map. And this is the meat of the plan. This is the only part of the plan that has any immediate use or automatic application through a rezoning case. If you live in a zoned area and you would like to have that property rezoned, or your neighbor wants to have their property rezoned, they submit an application. There are 11 different factors that we review when preparing a staff report, and one of those factors, factor number 3, says, what does the future land use map say about this proposed rezoning request? And so we would go to this map and see what that map recommends. So we're going to kind of do this in reverse because this is the meat of the plan. We're going to start there and kind of go through this review backwards because I want to make sure we spend most of our time on this first section. I'm going to go over a few outstanding questions regarding this section, and then we'll flip to the document, go through that portion page by page, and I'll remind you of these items when we reach them as we go through that document. So on page 99 of the document, there was a question, are we showing enough of this place type, and that's the high development place type, to handle our future B3 and B4 needs in the unincorporated areas? And our resolution to that is, yes, we believe so, understanding that the most appropriate place for B3 and B4 development is within the municipal limits. Activity nodes, which are often at the major intersections, and in these limited high-density development potential areas. Also on page 99, we had the question, could heavy and light industrial be placed in the high-density potential areas, or are these limited to commercial industrial nodes? And are those limited? That's talking about those industrial uses. And our resolution to this is, as a general rule, the industrial uses should be limited to the regions in the vicinity of the commercial industrial centers. We also recognize that the master plan is just one of many factors in a rezoning analysis, and a full parcel/community level analysis may override the recommendation of the master plan. So just because the master plan recommends something doesn't mean that it locks that in forever or overrides all the other factors of a zoning analysis. Page 99, we also had the question or the statement, we probably need to somewhere comment, even if it is in the form of a footnote, how tourist resort and RV parks fit into these place types. And we're essentially resolving that just in a notation here in the form of this meeting. Given the unique nature of the use types and the scale of this plan, we believe that these use types should be reviewed on a case-by-case basis, relying on the rezoning factors established in the zoning ordinance and applying the general principles of the master plan when evaluating conformity with this factor in the analysis. In my 2 years here, I don't think we've had a single tourist resort zoning request. They're just very rare in our zoned areas. We've had a handful of RV park requests, but that is also not quite as common. We have a lot of RV park requests, but just not a lot of RV rezoning requests. Also in section 4 on page 77, we had a comment. We said to add a comment about Loxley regarding the industrial growth. So our resolution is to add the following paragraph to page 77. And again, in a moment, I'll be going through the plan and we'll be highlighting where some of this will take place. The town, and so we're proposing adding this paragraph. The town of Loxley continues to experience substantial growth in the industrial and warehousing space. The town of Loxley is home to a recently completed Aldi grocery stores distribution center and regional headquarters. Most recently, the Home Depot announced plans to locate a last mile delivery facility to the town of Loxley. Any thoughts on that, or is that a decent summary recognizing some of the industrial growth in the town?
I think the town needs to change to city.
Oh, city, that's a great point. Thank you. Thank you for that. We'll note that as a needed change. All right, so I'm gonna switch my screen over to the plan itself. And I want to start by looking specifically at the place types and nodes for the future land use map. So you'll see this handout that we have for y'all. That's where I am right now. We're gonna cycle these forward. I'm gonna kind of cycle through this section one page at a time. And I see that y'all cannot see what's on my screen, so bear with me just a moment here. All right, so we're looking at this page. This is page 92 in your document. Page 92 shows the future place types. One of the big changes is a color coding change here. We actually had this in the January 5th document, but now it's been pushed through this whole section, and it really helps see the differences much better when folks are looking at this map. I'm going to just cycle down through some of these pages. Here's the full map. There's a high resolution version on the Baldwin Our Vision website. Again, these 6 different place types are created. You have the ideal conservation preservation areas, the conservation development areas, the rural / agriculture / low impact development potential areas. You have the moderate development potential areas. You see that in yellow. There's a good bit of that on the map. You have the mid-density development potential areas in orange, and then the high-density development potential areas in red. And we start talking about high-density development, we're looking at multifamily, RMF6, B3 and B4, zoning types. And this is where we had several of those questions that I just addressed that were kind of outstanding with this document and showing our proposed resolutions with those. I think I did have a duplicate page. I apologize in your packet for that. Let me pause here and say, do any of you have any comments? Again, not much has changed since January 5th, but any comments or input on this portion of the document? Just a reminder to turn on your microphone. There you go.
The high-density development areas, are you going to have a height minimum?
So in the high-density areas, remembering that this is a really the scale of this document itself, it will then be the zoning categories that are considered appropriate in there that would set those height limitations, if any that apply. So,
Okay.
for instance, in the high density, we would be looking at B3 and B4. So if a B3 or B4 zoning came in, it would be those height limitations associated with B3 or B4 zoning. That's a great question. Any other comments or questions on this portion of the document?
Matthew, this just may be me, but the colors that are on these maps are sometimes very difficult. Like, for example, the greens. By the time you get to that very light green, it looks good on the screen. It doesn't look good in a combination with anything. Is there anything that you can do to, I know we enhanced them once to try to make it a little bit better. Are there some other colors perhaps that could be either added or enhanced in some way?
Well, let me throw this out to you. Really, because anybody who's going to utilize this map, they're going to be zooming in on a parcel. So our ultimate intention would be to take these layers and put them on an online viewer. Ideally, I haven't checked with the revenue department yet, but they've been very gracious in the layers they've let us put on there. But there's the online parcel viewer that's free and open to the public, managed by the revenue department, shows all the parcels, has our zoning on there. To place these layers on there so someone can zoom in on a parcel and actually click that layer and get a final confirmation of what place type that parcel's in. Also, on the final version of this, the paper version, we will replace all the maps with 11 by 17 map versions. I think one other thing is the document that gets uploaded online. It's a big document, so we compress it. And I believe there's a lot of resolution quality that's even lost there as well in that. So I realize that probably doesn't maybe address it completely. We did feel like the color change that was implemented was a big step forward because the previous version was almost impossible to discern between the place types. So that's great feedback, and we appreciate it. Anybody else have any comments on this portion of the document? If not, we're going to continue down a couple pages. We can come back to any of these pages at any time. So this next section adds what we like to call activity nodes. And essentially, the activity node concept works like this for the public in here. You may have a part of the county that is green, which means it's ideal for conservation or low-intensity development or agricultural uses. But we still understand at certain crossroads it would make sense to have services located at those crossroads. That could be a fuel station. It could be some type of small grocery store. It could be some other type of small services, a medical facility or something like that, a doctor's office. Well, we don't want to say, well, this future land use map says only low intensity development here, and therefore you can't locate something at one of these primary crossroads. So you see all the dots on the map. In a moment, we'll be looking at some maps that are more zoomed in. But each of those dots represents a different node type. And I will actually zoom in on this map for a second, just for example purposes. And notice here at the bottom, we have a rural crossroads center, a neighborhood center, a village center, an urban mixed-use center, and a commercial industrial center. And then these are located throughout the map at different major intersections. I'm going to zoom back out again now. And as we move down through the document, you'll see that we then have a description of the types of uses we would expect to see at those crossroads. So if you're at a rural crossroads center, we would expect to see things like small-scale shops, restaurants, and local serving businesses. If you're at a neighborhood crossroads center, we'd expect to see slightly higher intensity uses. Again, that's right at that crossroads. Village center, that increases even more. Urban mixed-use center, even more. And then, of course, a commercial industrial center is focusing on that commercial industrial use. The pages that then follow from here are zoomed up sections of the map. You'll see the comment on the top right of the map that shows that we plan to ultimately implement this in 11 by 17 size within the paper version. We have very high resolution versions online that you can zoom in and look at the different parts of the county. But again, this shows where those different place types have been proposed throughout the county. I'm going to just flip through the rest of these slides here real quickly and pause there. Does anybody on the Planning Commission have any comments about these? One thing I will note, we had some proposed comments to add a couple nodes in Fairhope related to the District 8 and District 37 zoning elections, and that are now active and in place. And our consultant, when they updated the colors and produced these new maps for the urban areas, they put those right in there. So you'll see the comment itself is removed because they've already implemented that proposed change on here. Any comments or questions from the Planning Commission here? Again, I want to emphasize that this is the meat and potato of the plan. We have discussed it for months now, so we're not rushing through this by any means, but we're preparing to make a final recommendation to the County Commission, and so certainly want to see if there are any other additional comments. Ms. Jamie.
I'd sent this in an email to you, and you said you were going to get with the consultant. On page 101, and 120 in the Planning District 25, the Fort Morgan area. It appears there's land identified as rural agricultural potential. I don't think that that's possible.
So, great question. And let me, so that place type has now been changed for this very reason, instead to describe it as rural agriculture or low-impact development potential, which means anything that would occur in those areas would have to meet one of those criteria. Because we recognize that some rural land isn't necessarily agricultural land, and then some land that still kind of has a rural feel, like Fort Morgan, because there are large stretches of open or conserved land, aren't necessarily agricultural lands either. So this is actually a modification that we had a comment on here. If you look at our online version, there was a comment here recommending this change. And in their update to this portion where they brought in the urban areas, they went ahead and made that change. Now, one thing I do need to check, and I'm glad you brought this up, is whether or not they also corrected it on the table of, okay, and so it does look like they've changed it on the legend as well on the map. Does that answer that concern? On the legend on the map as well, it looks like that's now updated. I'll zoom in here to the rural
Okay.
agricultural and low impact
My
development.
copy doesn't show that.
And if you're looking at the full version, it was not yet updated in that one. It was updated on the supplement that was
got it today.
uploaded online.
Okay,
right.
thanks.
Great question. Thank you.
Matthew,
Yes, sir.
Matthew, on Zone C, map 14, on Zone C in the update, there's a neighborhood center node that's located basically like it's supposed to be at the crossroads in Alberta. You know, I'm assuming that's probably Highway 98 and County Road 83 that come through there. My question is, what is the relationship between this land use map and, say, the planning jurisdiction for the town of Alberta? Or is there a relationship between between the two?
Sure. That is a phenomenal question. You'll notice on this map, for those who are in attendance today, that the gray areas, those represent the municipal limits. Everything within the municipal limits are zoned, and each municipality has its own master plan or comprehensive plan for its zoned areas. So some of these
looking now, it's a little farther to the east, so, okay.
That's right. It is just outside, but you're right. It's right up against that. If at some point they were to annex it, we would no longer have, this map would no longer have any jurisdiction over it. And then also, you asked about the planning jurisdiction boundary. Some of these municipalities have planning jurisdictions that do go out there, but if it's in our zoned area, we still have that zoning authority in that planning jurisdiction boundary. Also, on July of this year, we expect those planning jurisdiction authorities, at least as it relates to subdivisions, to come back to the corporate limits of the municipalities. It's a great question. Thank you. Any other questions? Again, we can come back to this at any time, so I don't want you to feel rushed or to feel like if once we leave this section, we can't come back to it. I do want to note that you'll notice several pages crossed out at the end. We had announced this at the January 5th meeting, but this scorecard portion of the document is being removed because we do feel that the contents of this, if ever implemented, should be implemented in the form of the zoning ordinance or subdivision regulations themselves, because this document's intended to be a guide in nature. Okay, what we're going to do now, we're going to jump back to the PowerPoint that I displayed earlier, and we're going to go to this next section of the document and take any comments on that as well. So this next section, skip through this, is section 3 of the document, and this is what we call the action playbook. I mentioned earlier this is kind of like what a quarterback has available on the field to decide what play he should call next, and it's just helpful optional ideas. No mandates here, helpful optional ideas. This starts around page 53 of the book. The page numbers are getting a little cattywampus right now as we make markups and change things. But our plan is to come out of this meeting with a fully marked up document that we can now send back to the consultant to clean up and give the final form to the county commission. So let's talk about the changes there. Oh, I'm sorry. There are actually no, other than the markups that have been published online for some time now, there were no like questions that were left unknown. So now what we're going to do is we're going to switch back to that document, and we're going to review that section of the document itself and see if anybody has any specific questions.
Matthew, on the opening page of the action playbook, about halfway down the page, it says, playbook is intended to help the county commission and planning staff investigate and et cetera. Should the planning commission be inserted after the county commission as another benefit?
I think that is a great point. It looks like we kind of, that was this oversight there. If we could just note that we'll add that to the document as well. Great comment. Okay, so this is the opening page of the action playbook, and it should be noted here that we really focus on the fact that this creates no new mandates. They only represent ideas, and you'll notice that right there, one of our notes is that this will actually be highlighted in the final document, this portion that says they are not mandates. And so we want to emphasize that. And then as you go through the page itself, for each of the themes, so you'll notice the top here, it says protect agricultural lands and our rural communities. That's this right here. So these are action items, playbook items that could be implemented specific to this theme in the document. So I'm going to zoom in now, and we'll just look at a couple of these, and I'm just going to look at random ones. I'm not pulling out any specifically for any specific reason. Apologize there. Get this visible for everybody. So we'll just look at these first, this first one here. It says organized coordination between entities and agencies. That's the action type. Proposed action, hold a series of meetings with representatives of the farming community, USDA, the state of Alabama, Alabama Cooperative Extension, and the Farmland Protection Subcommittee, and other appropriate entities to evaluate options and tools for rural and agricultural preservation. So if this would be the first step in considering whether or not what options are out there for the agricultural community, if they have a desire to preserve their land in the long term, but still hate to lose the value, are there options out there? And so that would be the start of this. And we don't come with any preconceived notion of what could be the result of these meetings, but the first step is making sure everybody's in the room and deciding what might be most appropriate. We look over here, here's an amendment to subdivision regulations. Consider amendment to subdivision regulations to introduce land suitability standards within the unzoned areas of the county, which would establish minimum requirements for rural subdivisions. Create a presentation for both video and live delivery explaining the purpose of zoning generally and the impacts that zoning can have on community character through the regulation of lot sizes, landscape buffers, etc. So again, just examples of the different things that could be considered and could be done if the commission so chose. I'm going to just flip down through these pages now. You all have seen these before. We've had them published online now for several months. Any comments on any of these proposed playbook items? You can see the ones that have been proposed to be removed or where we found some type of typo and we're proposing some type of amendment. And feel free to stop me as we go through these. Again, we have proposals for transportation. We have proposals for coordinated distribution of public services, regional cooperation, and character and quality of life. One that I did want to point out, zoom in here, because we actually had some concerns from the Fort Morgan community on this one. And it was an unintentional misunderstanding. So amendment to the zoning ordinance, consider draft amendments to the zoning ordinance to specify design criteria along scenic waterways. And there was concern that we were saying we were going to tell people what color their houses could be or anything like that, and that wasn't the intention at all. It was meant to be, it's intended to be site design criteria, and that's just to make sure structures are far enough back from the water on these scenic waterways and things of that nature. But again, this is just a playbook idea. It's a possible idea that could be implemented that would have to go through a series of public meetings and have to be enacted by our county commission for something like that to take place. If this plan is adopted, none of these ideas by adoption of this plan take effect. Any questions or comments on any of these action items or this portion of the document?
Could I ask about why the change from affordable housing to attainable housing, and what kind of a definition do you have for attainable housing?
That is the, no pun intended, million-dollar question right now in Baldwin County. We are staying away from the term affordable, in part because over time it's gained some, we'll say, negative public connotations where folks assume that we're talking about some type of subsidized housing, and that's not what we're trying to focus on with the term. We're trying to focus on housing that can be attained by a young new family in our community. And knowing what the definition to that is right now is a little bit difficult. It's a bit of a moving target. We've certainly worked on that. But that's, some of the items in here would be aimed at having a more robust discussion around that very topic. It's a great question, thank you. Anybody else have any comments on this section of the plan? All right, I'm going to jump back to the PowerPoint presentation. Again, we can run back to any of these at any time. These last two portions of the plan we're going to breeze through because these aren't what we consider, I want to be careful how I say this, they're very substantive parts of the plan. They show all the summary of the community input, the overarching themes that were drawn from all that stakeholder input. But in essence, these are the reading portions of the plan, if that makes sense. So there's not as much in terms of what we saw in the yellow and green portions were the substance that got created. The blue and red portions are more of the background that led to that substance. So we'll move through this a little bit more quickly. We did have some, so in the portion about the overarching themes, we did have one outstanding question on page 32. It was noted by a member of the public that this is a direct copy of a core value on page 28, and they asked whether or not this was intentional. I'll show you this in a moment when we look at the plan. And our resolution, this core value is likely better suited for page 32 and will be removed from page 28. And so we appreciate, again, members of the public who have really scoured through this document and provided us a lot of great feedback. I'm not picking on Ms. Tracy Gamble, but I think this is one of your comments in there. So we appreciate that. Okay, I'm going to flip back to the document now, and we're going to look at this section 2 in more detail. There we go. All right, again, this is the themes and strategies section. The plan landed on 6 different themes, and those were derived, as it says up here, from community engagement and meeting with stakeholders throughout this entire process. I'm going to read through each of those themes. I'm not going to read through the core values. Again, this has been online now for a couple months. We've had a lot of discussion around these items, but the first theme is promote the protection of agricultural lands in our rural communities. We have some information there. There were a number of strategies associated with each of these, but a lot of those strategies were almost, in a sense, regurgitated in the action playbook portion. So we wanted to keep this document as simple as possible. So we removed those so that way there wasn't that unnecessary duplication. The next theme was protect our unique natural environment, enhance water quality, and mitigate flooding. This is where you'll see the note, number 2, it was noted by a member of the public that this is a direct copy of the core value on page 29. And looking at this, it turns out it's actually page 28, as at least shown down here. Was this intentional? And so that was the resolution I mentioned just a moment ago. It will be removed from this page. I'm sorry, it will be removed from page 28, and it will remain on this page. All right, our next theme was improved transportation options and connectivity. Now, I feel like here I have to pause and remind everybody that there's no magic wand here or genie in a lamp. We can have a theme like this, but this is something we deal with all the time. This is something that's a huge concern to the public, and saying it in a plan by itself doesn't fix things. It's a slow working process, so it's an ambitious theme for us to have, and we want to keep that at the forefront of us. I just want to know that everybody, to make sure we know that when we vote for this, it's not going to improve improve everything. It is just a theme. One thing to note, what you see up here is our community potential character roadmap. Again, this is something that's discussed in the playbook section. It says the county should consider creating a character roadmap that says we will encourage development along this road as long as development takes place in a way that preserves the character, the rural character of the road. And so it tries to draw that balance of preserving the character of the community while still allowing folks to utilize the property that they have. All right, the next theme was promote the coordination or promote the coordinated distribution of public services. The next theme was encourage regional cooperation. And the final theme was maintain the character of our communities and quality of life. I'm going to pause now. Anybody on the Planning Commission have any comments on this portion of the document? Again, we've already received a number of comments from you all through this process. But anybody have any final comments? Mr. Brewer.
A minor thing on page 54 in the overview, about 5 lines from the bottom, expansive to the people who live and visit here. What about adding the word work after live?
That's great. That's a great point. What page are you on?
I'm
again?
on page 54 of the encourage regional cooperation.
Okay. Okay.
It's about 5 or 6
And is
lines.
that in the, are we looking at the vision statement right now?
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
the vision statement. Provide benefits that are.
Okay, I see that right here. I
Yeah.
apologize.
Yeah,
Yeah,
just-
to the people who live and visit here, I think that's
Yeah.
a great comment. To the people who live, work, and visit here.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the Planning Commission? And again, what we can do now is we can jump to section 1 and then open the public hearing, and we may have additional feedback from there. So we'll finish off here by covering section 1. I think I have one other comment area in this section. As a reminder, this was the process overview section. It basically summarized how we got to where we are today. What process did we go through to get here? And we had one outstanding question here in section 1. This was on new page 14. And this was to recommend adding language about site-specific data that can modify the future land use map. So the future land use map, we're talking about a county that's 1,600 square miles. And creating a plan to cover every square mile of that is a pretty big task. So we're utilizing this computer-generated mapping to guide us in that, and the kind of the algorithm to create that map based on all the different inputs. Well, guess what? Whenever you do something like that, there are going to be times where you might zoom in and realize this shows up as perhaps ideal for conservation, but it looks like it's primarily uplands. We can get a wetland delineation and show that, okay, we can now take this additional data into consideration when considering this for future rezoning. So we're recommending the addition of this language. I'll show where in just a moment. But this language would say, it should be noted that an applicant can present site-specific information to support a rezoning or use that may not be contemplated by the place type displayed on the future land use map. As an example, a wetland delineation may support an applicant's case to allow a business use on land that may be displayed as ideal conservation/preservation. The Planning Commission and County Commission should consider the additional information in conjunction with the future land use map place type patterns and the guide's core values to determine whether the proposed rezoning or use is, I say appropriate is what the word will actually be when it's placed in the plan. At this time, I'm going to switch back to the document itself. And we will run through this portion, and I will highlight that section that we just discussed. All right, so we did a bunch of changes to this. This is all published as part of the June 5th meeting, so this isn't new changes. Some of this introductory language, as it was initially published, was a little bit difficult to read and follow. And so you'll see a lot of X's here that we just got rid of a lot of that stuff and replaced it with some simpler introductory information. Again, this has been online now for several months, so this is not new material. It's information that we discussed at our January 5th joint work session. Now, the bottom of this page, or this page, is entitled How to Use This Document, and that missing text that I discussed would go at the bottom of this page. So as a final explanation that, well, what if we have this map and now we're at that third factor for rezoning and it says this, and we can show that that is not, the computer model got it wrong in that situation. Well, we're saying that absolutely somebody can come and provide evidence to the Planning Commission and to staff as to why the computer model had something off at that particular location, and then that's something that can be considered. And again, a reminder that this document only looks at one of the 11 factors for a rezoning case, but it, again, can be used to help change perhaps what this document might say about that rezoning. Again, that's the meat of this section. It also goes over all the public survey responses and the meetings with stakeholders. This is really fun information to read in the document about the different survey responses we received throughout the process. And that is the end of that section. Planning Commissioners, any comments on this section of the document?
Matthew, real quick, back to the third factor on the 11 factors that'll go into the rezoning, and maybe I just need you to say it differently. If that third factor comes back based on your research and whatnot, and a rezoning case, does not conform, with the master plan, but the other 8 or 9 or 10 are okay, is that factor to be weighed more heavily than the other 8 or 9 when it comes to us evaluating whether or not this rezoning case is approved or not? Or are we simply relying on some piece of evidence from the public to come in that if it does not come in, I guess how do we weigh that out?
So that is a great question. And the answer is it will be weighed out on a case-by-case basis. Now, I think what you'll find in reality is that it would be a very rare set of circumstances where the master plan or the guide to growth would say, no, this isn't appropriate here, and everything else would say yes. As a general rule, I would expect that we would find similarities within the factors that you would find if the guide to growth is saying this isn't a good idea, a bunch of the zoning factors are also going to say it's not a good idea. In the case, though, where the guide to growth says it's not a good idea and all the rest of the zoning factors say it is a good idea, that is probably a sign that we should pause and say, did the guide to growth get something wrong here? Okay, it's certainly not any type of infallible document. It is just a guide. And that might be a signal for us to say, let's take a closer look and take serious what this applicant might have to show here regarding what's going on this piece of property. That is a great question. Mr. Boer, you have a
Yes,
comment?
I'm sorry. Thank you. I've got a couple of questions about this section. On the introductory page, the rewrite on that, the first line of that, growth in Baldwin County cannot be stopped. That seems like an awfully harsh statement. Is there not some way we could make that something along the line of respect the past and look to the future, those kind of something, rather than just to say it cannot be stopped?
All right, let me get to this. So we're talking about this statement right here, the importance of encouraging quality growth.
This is on the introduction page.
Oh, okay. Oh, it's on that red comment down there.
Yes,
Okay.
I'm sorry. I thought that had
No,
been-
I apologize. It also happens to be on this page right here, the importance of encouraging quality growth. The growth in Baldwin County cannot be stopped. The important question becomes, what type of growth should Baldwin
Yeah.
County encourage?
Mhm.
So let me go to the introductory page you're referring to now so we can,
Well, you may have moved that over, but that's where I saw it.
I think it's still there as well as introductory note right here. Yeah, we're proposing to replace this text. Again, this was in the January 5th item. I'm just saying that for the public to know that this is not something we're springing on anybody today or anything like that, just so that way we know that. So here's what the new statement is supposed to say. Growth in Baldwin County cannot be stopped. The important question becomes, what type of growth should Baldwin County encourage? While this guide does not create new rules or change existing rules, it does provide a vision to aid in the review of rezoning requests and to consider how rules may be modified in the future to help promote quality growth. Certainly happy to entertain an alternate wording there. Any thoughts off the cuff?
I would just, my thoughts would be to reference the past history and use that as a planning tool for the future, something like that, rather than to say cannot be stopped. It just seems that that's harsh for somebody who's coming in and trying to figure out what to do in the county to read.
Okay.
The other, and maybe we can tie this together, as you and I discussed, the word rules is another one that I think is a harsh word that could be changed to regulations, something, ordinances, something rather than rules. Again, rules have, to me at least, a connotation of hard and fast. And to soften that, because things are going to change over the next 5 to 10 years, that this document will be in place. So I throw that out as more of a suggestion than anything else. And then one final thing is the opening page of the document.
Okay.
And at the bottom, where you have stricken Baldwin County and changed it to the zoned areas of Baldwin County. To me, this is a document that represents the growth of our entire county. Things, again, will change over that period of time, and I think it reflects better on the county by just saying this is a guide in Baldwin County, rather than only in a specific part of it, which, if you turn the page, the second page does explain that. But to me, this is a vision for Baldwin County as a whole, not just, it may impact today certain parts of the county, but in the overall scheme of things, I would hope that we could refer to it as a guide to Baldwin County.
Thank you for that feedback, and I understand and respect where you're coming from on that. I think our concern is that you all know how hard it is here to sit up here as a planning commission and hear a case in an unzoned area and have the community come out and pleading with you, saying, this does not fit the character of our community, and you know that your hands are tied because zoning is the tool to evaluate character, and if it's unzoned, that tool is not available. And what we want to avoid is a citizen printing this document off in an unzoned area and coming in front of y'all and say, look, y'all passed this document. See, here are the core values. This is not appropriate in this area, but it's an unzoned area. And so we want to make sure they know that this document is limited to zoned areas, and there's not confusion on anybody's part who lives in an unzoned area thinking that this document is going to do something for them when it just doesn't apply to them. And so I respect your vantage point there, because certainly it contemplates the entire county in case a community chooses to become zoned. But we decided to make this change just so that way citizens were put on notice right away that this document is not going to do anything for you if you're trying to fight some type of development in an unzoned area of the county. But as your point is well taken. Let me ask you this on your other comments. Before we depart from that, would there be any value in us, discussing some possible alternate language? I could type it in right here on the screen potentially. I don't know if any of the other planning commissioners have any thoughts in that regard, or if you all feel more or less pretty comfortable with it. The reason I was telling Mr. Boer I think it was yesterday, we were discussing this. The reason we chose rules, or maybe I should say I chose rules, is because I really like the illustration of the sports illustration. And you have rules, you have referees, and you have people throwing flags if there's a violation of the rules. And so I use that illustration a lot to describe what we do. And so it naturally kind of flows as in keeping with that illustration. But you brought up a great point that from your perspective, it feels harsher to you than just the term regulations. And anybody on the Planning Commission have any thoughts there?
Could you not just strike the first sentence and the next statement and just start it with a question? What type of growth should Baldwin County encourage?
That's actually a good thought. Anybody else have any thoughts on that? Everybody like that recommendation? That helps soften that. What about the rules/regulations variance? Same thing with you, Ms. Jamie. Regulations feels a little softer. Okay. Planning commissioners, does that feel pretty comfortable to you to go ahead and change that to regulations? Your microphone is off right now, and I'm sorry.
Regulations might deal with some of your development criteria and then not address other development criteria. If you put regulations, is that broad enough?
I believe so, because there's nothing we can require of a development unless it's in our regulations.
Okay.
So I would feel like it would be broad enough if that's the concern with that word. It's a great question, though. Thank you. So everybody good with that? And we're not taking a vote here. We'll take a vote in a second, but I'm going to go ahead. I figure while we have this open, we'll change that. All right. Mr. Chairman, I think at this time it might be appropriate to open the public hearing and then go from there.
Okay. All right, this time I'll open the public hearing. I have those that have signed up. I'll call on you, if you will, you come to the mic in front here and share your thoughts with us. The first that I have is Carl, and I probably picked the hardest one to say. Shalakic? Was I close?
Thank you very much. I'm got a question about infrastructure situation. My wife and I live in the Sonora Place subdivision in Summerdale, and we do not have any cell phone service. We do not have any high-speed internet. This problem has happened since we built the house in 2019. I filed complaints with the FCC, and they basically turned it over to Verizon. Verizon says, we realize there's a problem, but this is an ongoing issue, and we have you can't receive or make calls from our subdivision. And it's not just a Verizon issue. It's an issue with all the carriers, because I've talked to other neighbors in the neighborhood, and there's no bars on your phone. So as far as emergency situation, you try to make a phone call or get an incoming phone call, forget it. It goes right to voicemail. I've spoken with Verizon technical support several times. They said that my house is 1.8 miles from the tower on County Road 32. There shouldn't be an issue. Well, there is. And it's just a very dangerous situation where if we have to call law enforcement or fire, we can't get a signal. We can't, and like I said, it's not just Verizon, it's all the carriers. Because neighbors that I've talked to have switched to AT&T, T-Mobile, same problem. You're talking to them and the phone call drops. So that's an issue that I would like to see if anyone, y'all could do anything about this, getting this situation fixed. And as far as the high-speed internet, we got internet through Brightspeed, and that's our only option in our subdivision. That's our only option. It's 3 megs of download. That's it. So you can't stream, you can't put up a security system on your home because you just can't, there's no speed. So I was just wondering if there was anything that could be done as far as an infrastructure situation.
Matthew, you want to tell us
Sure.
where we are countywide on that right now? I know that's a countywide problem.
Yeah, great question. We did recently amend our subdivision regulations to require proof of availability of broadband. We implemented it in sort of a pilot project type mode because previously that hadn't been required. I still think we're one of just a few entities that are requiring that. So we're still in the early stages of seeing how that plays out. Unfortunately, it is a little difficult. Sometimes they'll bring a letter from Brightspeed saying, yeah, we'll provide high-speed internet here, but then it can be pretty difficult to enforce in the long run once they have it in, and then homeowners start complaining down the road. But one thing that is in this guide, this is on page 73 of 126 of the agenda. It's on 65 of the playbook itself, but it's an amendment to the zoning ordinance. This is, again, one of the playbook items. It says, consider draft amendments of the zoning ordinance to require for proposed rezonings to high-intensity thresholds, for instance, possibly something that could create 50 lots or something like that. It's just given as an example, a higher level of data. Because right now a zoning application doesn't require them to look at something like that. We look at very general things like, are there any known major issues? But maybe if it's a rezoning that is going to trigger some type of higher intensity development, that we say, well, listen, before we issue this rezoning, we need to know that there is internet available, or perhaps that there is cell service available. So it's on there as one of our playbook items that would play into that item, but it is something we're hearing from all across the county right now.
Okay.
Thank you for that comment.
Thank you very much.
Joe Emerson.
Good evening. I've got a statement prepared. My name is Joe Emerson. I'm the president of the Fort Morgan Civic Association. First, I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to provide input toward this plan that will address the future growth of Baldwin County. The Fort Morgan Civic Association supports a plan for increased density along the Highway 59 corridor in the areas surrounding major intersections along the route, as well as in municipalities where increased density is warranted and conducive for growth. However, we believe that increased density and intensity of development should be limited along State Highway 180, especially in the unincorporated areas of Fort Morgan, Planning District 25. Any efforts to increase density on the Fort Morgan Peninsula will be detrimental to the natural environment that absolutely must be protected for the future generations of residents and visitors alike to enjoy. In fact, to overbuild Fort Morgan would be akin to repeating the same mistakes made by other counties and municipalities that have left Fort Morgan as one of the few remaining historic, and environmental gems along the Gulf Coast. We members of the Fort Morgan Civic Association urge the Baldwin County Planning Commission and the commissioners to recognize the value and necessity of protecting District 25 by working with FMCA to develop a separate sector or action land use plan with an emphasis on historic and environmental preservation and conservation. A sector or action plan specific to Planning District 25 could address ongoing issues such as public safety, and the need for traffic and drainage impact analysis for flooding and evacuation purposes, as well as environmental impact of construction, with attention to endangered species, protected wetlands, and historic preservation, as well as the conservation of the indigenous flora, fauna, and marine life of the area. A sector or action plan designed specifically to address the land use needs of Fort Morgan should comply with Alabama Code 45-2-261-64 in 2020, which states the Baldwin County Commission shall enforce this subpart in the manner as provided in Section 16 of Act 91-719, and in performing its functions related to the planning and zoning, the Baldwin County Planning and Zoning Commission and the Baldwin County Commission shall specifically consider the historic nature of the existing development within the Fort Morgan District, the historical and environmental character of the district, and the unique needs of the district related to hurricane safety and infrastructure for potential evacuation. The Fort Morgan Civic Association sees this plan for growth as an opportunity to further preserve and protect Fort Morgan and better the quality of life for our residents and visitors. We look forward to working with the Baldwin County Planning Commission and the commissioners to accomplish these goals in the coming years. Thank you.
How y'all doing? I appreciate y'all doing what you do. What I wanted to mainly speak about is the building of around here in Baldwin County. A lot of people have already farmed that land for many years, and if they want to sell their land, I hope y'all really think about it, of them being able to do what they need to do with it. I'm not saying we need to just go wide open. I'm hoping y'all think and talk to other people before you make a decision on anything on new growth, but make sure that you know that I was born and raised here. My family come here in 1892, and all of them's in construction. I'm a fourth generation builder. My son will be the fifth generation. Right now he's at construction, but we've seen many of things. I worked in farms when I was younger, picking potatoes, before the roads was even paved. Most of them was dirt. But the main thing I want y'all to think about is, if these farmers, or some of them, is already getting in retiring age, let's don't pick and choose who we let develop their land. Let's make sure we have an open head and think about all people. Just because, and I ain't talking bad about anybody, people moved in here, ain't been living here 15 years, telling us what to do. I don't think that's really a nice thing for people who lived here all their life or 80 years. A lot of these farmers might want to sell a piece of their land. I think they should have the option to sell and develop if that's what they want to do with their land. If they want to stay and keep it as farmland, yes. But just think about what you're doing, and please talk to your other friends around you before y'all make any decision. Make sure other folks know. And our construction, if we slow down development, don't slow down too much, because be careful, you put us in a depression or something. We don't need that, because 80% of us in Baldwin County depend on construction. Construction is a big area of where our people get their money. Whether you work in a store, wherever you work, I'm not going to come in there and buy fuel if I'm not doing construction. I'm going to be at home and I ain't buying fuel, so you ain't got a job. A lot of our people in here, the county wouldn't be big as it is and wouldn't have as many employees if it wasn't for construction, because we'd be off like Escambia County, Alabama, and all them. It'd be real small, no growth. All I'm saying is, let's just don't think about the new people coming in. Let's think about the ones that live here for years and make sure we really, assist them to do things they want to do too. You come in, you've been here 5 or 6 years in the subdivision, I think about you, and I know you got your point of view. But if you've been here 50 years and you owned your farm and you owned your land and you want to get rid of it or divide it for your kids, I don't think we ought to mess that up. I think we ought to work with them folks. And I appreciate y'all listening to me, and thank you. All right.
Mr. Nelson?
I don't know if I should talk here today because I actually thought this was a master plan for Baldwin County and not just a master plan for the zoned areas of Baldwin County. So I have like a 2-page outline of what I wanted to talk about today. But a lot of it has nothing to do with zoned areas because I'm assuming that most of these zoned areas have already done things like reduced density and stuff like that in their own areas. I agree with the gentleman that just spoke about, letting, that new people shouldn't be telling us what to do with our land, because my family was actually here about 30 years before yours, and we don't like a lot of this density, and we would like to have that reduced. I think that's the main theme of most of the people in Baldwin County now, is that we need to reduce density. I don't know what that has to do with today, but I'm, putting it out there for you. That's all I have, because for the simple reason I had general things, that I don't think have anything to do with the zoned areas in particular. Thanks.
Tracy Campbell?
Good afternoon, Commissioners. Thank you for letting the public speak. I think our vision growth, guide to growth is fabulous. And it makes a lot of common sense. And sometimes these days, common sense doesn't seem to enter into some of the things we do or the things we approve or deny. I think that's the general guide in life is common sense. And no, property rights are individual and they should all be respected. However, there are times when one person's property right might affect their neighbor's property right. So I think that's always a balance that needs to be considered rather than just possibly the right of the owner or the seller and what they might be asking to be done. And I have an affinity for the rural character, and I think this guide is a wonderful tool to keep in mind regarding density, as the lady who spoke before me is concerned. I think there are some things that might be possible to edit in the future and maybe change some regulations or some definitions, and I'm happy to work on those because, for instance, RSF2 would be one example. It seems a little bit large for a rural area. However, there could be some interim type of density that could be added between RSF1 and RSF2. And that's just one example of things I think that would be beneficial to help in making some decisions not so much all or nothing or one way totally versus the other. And so I'm just glad that the county is doing this. I think it's very important, and I know that you have paid great attention to all the details, and I think it's important to just keep those in mind, and thank you for doing this. Okay.
Boy, Kelly?
Hello. I always have to adjust these. I apologize. My name is Chloe Kelly. I'd first like to thank you for allowing public input for this document. I can really appreciate and know that other members of the community appreciate the efforts to collaborate with a variety of parties, and that does not go unnoticed. I understand a lot of the overarching guidelines and the well intentions of this document, and I think the intention behind it and what it's looking to achieve is sound. However, there's a number of aspects of the document that I feel could be revised or iterated to maybe achieve that in a better way or have better outcomes. Like the gentleman that spoke before me, this document points to protecting members of the agricultural community. I will say I'm a fourth generation farmer. I don't work in farming, not exactly the most physically able, but my grandparents owned a farm that they've inherited, and that has been our family's livelihood. And I would say for those that are in agriculture in the United States, they can probably appreciate that it's not the business it once was. And coming from a generation that is kind of phasing out of that business, I would like to point out, like, not only from my family, but based on like USDA data, land value makes up about 84% of the average agricultural family's balance sheet. So a farm, about 84% of their value is with the land. Let that sink in. If you don't farm, which unfortunately is not as profitable as it once was, the next step is for you to sell the land. What you can do with the land directly influences the value of it. Whether we like it or not, that's the economics of it. And so I ask you to pause and think about if the intention behind what you're trying to do and what ultimately some of the regulation will actually do match. Because I don't think that's necessarily the case pertaining to this. I don't think it would be the intention to take individuals of the agricultural community and potentially reduce their land value by anywhere from 30 to 50%. I don't think it would be the intention of this group to inadvertently put in place restrictions and regulations that might further the struggles that we have in this community on the affordability issue. I know it was mentioned about what's the definition of affordable or attainable. I don't have a definition for attainable, but affordable by the federal government standards is 30% of your income going to your housing. Average annual income in Baldwin County is $61,000 household. So that's generally two individuals. That's about $1,500 a month. You can afford, with a, what are we at, 6.5%, 7% interest rate, maybe $250,000 for a home if you can afford the down payment. I understand the intention and certainly want to make sure that this community and this county is what we all want it to be. But I think that there needs to be a real hard look at whether or not the regulations actually will achieve that. And even if they do, what are the potential economic impacts, good or bad, that come along with it? Also, I'd like to point out that although this document is not regulatory in nature and that's how it's being presented, throughout the document, it points to changes in policy, proposed zoning amendments, proposed subdivision regulations, and just in general, limiting the use and rights of property. So while I understand that this document might not do it, it essentially outlines what will ultimately be done. And it points to having it be a factor of whether or not zoning or proposed development or whatnot, it will ultimately be a consideration of whether or not that conforms with this. And so I think it's a little disingenuous to say that it's not regulatory, because even though this might not be the instrument that does it, it lays the groundwork to do it. Finally, I'd like to say, I think there just needs to be a really stringent look about where do we want to see this county go? How do we get there? But how do we make sure we protect the people that are already here? Thank you.
Okay. Deborah Reagan, that's probably not right.
I have no intention of speaking today, but after listening to him speak about the new vision, the quality of life, and for the citizens and the people who live and work here, I was sitting back thinking, we go through the zoning process, and we give people a permit to build, whether it be a business or be a house. And we're mixing those two things together in a lot of our neighborhoods. So I'm going to hit on this point today, storage buildings. Just because it's it's right next to my neighborhood. We all think of a storage building as we pull up, we unload our stuff, we put in the storage building, and we drive away. And that's not happening. Those storage buildings are now businesses. My neighborhood has a storage building next to it. It started as one, and they're up to 8. They're massive storage buildings. These storage buildings now have businesses that can run all night long in there, and that's not fair to our neighbors. That's not fair in any way. And if it was put in as a storage building, is exactly what it should be used for. It has a gymnastics company in there now. It has full-time, almost round-the-clock people running businesses there. Trucks constantly in and out. And that's not fair to the neighborhood. This neighborhood has been there since 1975. And I think we really need to think we've got a master plan going, but we also need to realize mixing businesses and neighborhoods is not fair to anyone. And when we put storage buildings in, we need to really think of what we say to these people that we allow that to happen. It's a true storage building. Now, can you go back and look at those codes and look at what you said that was? At this point, you should be able to. But, to me, a storage building is you store stuff in it. And we've got businesses running out of them, so. And I had no intention of talking about that. I was really going to talk about taking down all our trees and doing something to our water and our creeks and all of that. But when you talked about quality of life, my neighbors are losing their quality of life because of this.
Okay. Thank you. All right, that's all that I had signed up to speak. Is there someone after hearing, you've decided I'll give you the opportunity to speak. You'll need to come up and give your name and.
My name's Kathy Barnett. I don't really have a statement. I just have a question for clarification. Are all of the strategies now being removed? Because you just read one off, and so I'm confused. Are they just being moved to the new section, or are all of those strategies coming out and you're just keeping the goals?
Which one? So there are themes, there's a vision statement, and then there's like 4 core values below that vision statement. And then on the following pages there are strategies. All the strategies are being removed. What I read about being removed from page, I think 32, or leaving on 32 and removing it from page 28 were one of the 3 or 4 core values associated with the theme.
Right, so all of the strategies that reference the tables, that have the tables from the section that I should
Let's just, let me go.
document up, I'm sorry.
Are you talking about these?
Yes, so they referenced strategies in that section with the strategies. Are all of those strategies, are they going to go into that section, or are they just all being removed from that previous section?
They're all being removed from the previous section, and I think I have a note here where it says primary strategy on this table. We'll replace that with, well, that will actually be eliminated as well, because the primary strategy, there won't be a primary strategy and a secondary strategy anymore.
So basically, the action matrix will be revised to just go all the way down to just the proposed action.
Well, these 2 rows here will disappear.
Okay, that's what I was looking for. Thank you.
That's a great question.
Yeah. All right. Matthew, did you want to address some of the comments that were made?
Sure, and all those were phenomenal comments from the citizens, and we really appreciate you taking the time. One thing that came up was regarding future edits. I think Ms. Tracy mentioned something about this, and I'm glad you said it because it reminded me of something I hadn't discussed tonight. We know that no document ever produced is perfect. And so this document is one that, once approved, ideally will be updated frequently, probably realistically on like a 5-year timeline. Everybody likes to be ambitious and say every 2 years or 3 years, but 5 years is probably a little bit more realistic. And so that's something, and it's understood that our community is going to change over time, and therefore this plan will change over time. I do want to talk about the agricultural use question. We work closely with the agricultural community, and we know that there are a lot of different opinions and priorities from that community. About a month ago, I met with, well, first of all, I supplied this to Alpha, this document, a little over a month ago, and they had an internal committee who looked at it and everything like that. And then they invited me to speak at their monthly Alpha meeting, and attended that, and it was a pretty full house. Had a great meeting with those folks going over this document. Certainly there were questions, and I certainly wouldn't want to in any way represent the position of the agricultural community, but had a lot of great feedback from the folks in that room. And again, we understand that there are folks who see this from both sides. That's one reason we've been very careful in our action playbook to not say what we think the solution is on that specific item. The first step is meeting with that whole community, and there are already meetings taking place along those lines, but continuing those meetings, coming up with ideas. One really cool idea is allowing farmers to sell development rights so that they can get value out of their land while still also keeping it, and that allow a developer to use those development rights to increase the density of a development in an area where density is appropriate. So that way it's kind of ends up being a win-win for everybody. But again, we don't want to force those on anybody. We want that to be something that if there is anything that comes out of this in terms of a proposal, that it be completely optional, something that could allow members of the agricultural community who do want their land preserved for agricultural uses to still get development benefit out of it potentially. So there's no silver bullet there, but we're approaching that issue very carefully and with great communication with the agricultural community. Final thing was the business and office warehouse, and to that I would say in our zoning ordinance, which again, this is a guide, the document itself that carries out zoning is the zoning ordinance. We distinguish between mini warehouses and office warehouses. An office warehouse is one where you can operate a business out of. A mini warehouse you're not supposed to be operating a business out of. So we would certainly like to take a look at that specific situation and go back and see what was approved there, and is there some violations that are occurring. And you can talk to one of our team members or myself, give us that information, and we'll certainly take a look at that. So, but that's the reason that zoning exists, to ensure that there is that compatibility between uses. And it's not perfect. Baldwin County is huge, and it's developed in different ways. It could have been a grandfathered use, for instance, there. I don't know yet. But that is the purpose of zoning, to try and create as much of that compatibility as possible. And I think I tried to address the main points there.
Matthew, there was one thing that I think Ms. Kelly brought up I'd like for you maybe to address. Some of these action points are recommending future change. Would you kind of go through the process that's going to have to, because I don't want, I think you've made it clear this is not regulatory nor is it suggesting, but what would be the process to make changes?
That's right. That's a great question. So the rule books that we use as referees to officiate this land development game, I know it's not a game, but to use that analogy, are the zoning ordinance and the subdivision regulations. We are amending those usually once to twice every year. And when we amend those, first it comes to y'all. There's a public hearing. Folks can give input. Then it goes to the county commission, which are the elected officials of the county, to consider whether or not that change is appropriate. Before we initiate any of the things in this playbook, we're going to need a mandate from y'all or the county commission to say, hey, planning and zoning staff, we think this playbook might action item might be appropriate for us to start investigating. Can you look into it and see if maybe we should be looking into this further? And then there will be those series of public hearings for the public to give input. We'll engage stakeholders as much as possible, and it won't be until the elected officials of the county enact the change that it would actually make a regulatory change to the document.
Okay. All right. Anything else then from?
Nothing else here.
You'll have to come back up front, Mr. Booth.
And while he walks up here, I do want to just point out that we just talked about subdivision regulations and the zoning ordinance and the master plan, but the Planning and Zoning Department also has the code enforcement section to it, which is enforcing those rules that are in place and what we've allowed to, be permitted or be constructed and everything. And while we have boots on the ground, we also, if you see something that you think is a violation of the zoning ordinance or code ordinance, then you need to contact the planning department so that they can send a code enforcement agent out there and see if there is a violation of what the planning commission or the county commission has allowed to be built there, operated there, or run at that particular location. So we're not just voting yay or nay on different things. There's also the code enforcement aspect of the Planning and Zoning Department to make sure that what the Planning Commission has allowed is what's actually being done in the locations that it's allowed in. So I just want to make sure that that's a different area of planning and zoning, but it's very important because it's actually carrying out what the commission has said, you can do this at that location.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
One question for Matthew. Was you letting agriculture and farmers do this before that you decided to let them do it now as far as their land?
Say that one more time.
Well, are you letting the farmers do their agriculture, doing what they wanted to do before now, or was you not letting them do it?
I don't completely understand the
The
question.
was,
So
what you was talking about a while ago is now you're going to see about letting the farmers do agriculture and farming. I mean, let them do part subdivision and part farming.
No, so what I was saying there, and just so there's no confusion,
Yeah.
that one thing that committee's looking at, they're looking at different ideas that would be 100% voluntary. And I was just referencing one that I thought was kind of cool, and that was where someone can sell their development rights, which means you don't develop the land, but you sell the development rights. That's not part of this plan or anything. I'm just saying it's an example of an idea that could be developed. And it would make it so that way they can monetize your land, but still continue to keep it 100% farm.
Was that able to do it before or not?
Currently, the's no mechanism to do that.
That's what I wanted to know.
That's right.
That's all I wanted to ask.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.
It's a great question.
Thanks, sir.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Chris Vogler. I've been a resident of Baldwin County for about 36 years, 34 in Lake Forest, and recently moved out to the Elsinore community. Love it. Thank you. The one thing that just really concerns me is that are we putting the cart before the horse in that when it comes to infrastructure? And I was happy to hear it was one of the first things that was brought up was when it comes to the infrastructure. You know, I've seen the growth on 181 and 64 and 13, where you've got these communities that have got, 100, 200 homes being put in. Where's the sewer going? Do we have the electrical that supports this? Do we have the roads? Obviously not. Anyone that lives up or down 181 knows. So my thing is, I'm thrilled to death. Like I say, I plead ignorance. Yeah, I filled out the surveys and a few other things with y'all. But, we got a plan, or you're constructing a plan, but are you also going to ask ALDOT and the MC, Mobile County Planning Commission? Yeah, because I've been to some of those meetings as well. And it's like, guys, between Mobile County and Baldwin County, we're joined at the hip. And obviously, the state doesn't understand, the feds don't understand that, this is not something that requires tolls or anything else. So are we putting the cart before the horse in that we're not planning to have the proper infrastructure?
So it's a great question. That's, in many ways, that's the purpose of this document, to help say where is the infrastructure such that development is appropriate and where is there not the infrastructure. So for instance, the urban area boundary that's used to help identify areas where more development is okay is partially identified by those representing those areas where there would be more infrastructure in place. And so when you look at that future land use map, you'll see more green in the rural areas, and that's because we're saying, you know what, there's not really the infrastructure out there to handle a high density development. So really this plan, it's a pretty high scale plan for trying to cover the whole county, but it's really aimed at trying to take a bite out of the elephant of what the very issue you're addressing.
So is the state, the feds, MCA, the planning commission and everything else, are they also going to be involved in this plan?
Sure. So actually, Miss Sarah Sislak's here with the Eastern Shore MPO. She participated in some of our stakeholder meetings. And it's important to understand that this is because this is a guide level document, their involvement, other than just giving input at this stage potentially, at the actual development stage, I want to be careful how I say this, but there is almost no development that comes through our office where we have not checked with ALDOT or the county highway engineer first to see if there are any roadway improvements directly associated with that development that need to be made. Now, the cumulative effect of tourists and everything like that in our county creates a whole new dynamic in our roads that sometimes it's hard to fully put a finger on the capacity needs of our roadways, and that's a very challenging task. We have a lot of folks working very hard on that, and this guide helps support that, but it's not like any type of silver bullet that's going to necessarily fix that. But just know that that dialogue is occurring with those agencies.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. All right. I'm going to close the public hearing at this time. Matthew, you have any closing comments or I'll ask if anybody in the Planning Commission has any questions for staff?
I have two. One of them I had also pointed out in the email. On page 53, this is a map number 7, job density, and each little red dot equals 5 workers. And down in my neck of the woods, it says that there's about 150 people working in the swamp.
So that's a great question. I believe what's taking place there is that data is a lot of times displayed at like a normalized type level, and it's taken off these commercial type surveys that are, I still remember when I was actually with the MPO 10 years ago, we had the highest, the business that reported the highest number of employees in the county said it was located on County Road 13. I thought, wow, what business is this? And I dug deeper and I found out it was an upholstery company on County Road 13. I thought, wow, that is a huge operation. So I picked up the phone and called the business, and it was a 1 or 2 or 3 man operation, and the owner answered and he said, oh yeah, I remember when they called and asked that. I just told them 4,000 employees just for the fun of it. So there are anomalies that do sometimes show up in data, and a lot of times these results get normalized to try and account for that, and I think that that's all that's occurring there. I think the important thing to notice is, or to note is that that is not, other than showing that that was used to help generate a basic sense of where employment occurs, it's not otherwise being used for any decision after the future land use map is fully prepared. So it's a great question, though. I know it's a little unnerving when you see those dots out in the middle of the swamp.
And then on the introduction page, it's listed page 18, it might be something different. And this kind of addresses what different people were saying in their area of the county being different and kind of all being included under one plan. And I'm going to read directly from here, and I want Matthew to answer a question. It is understood that the community level planning may be warranted at a future date in zoned high-growth communities with significant historic, cultural, and natural resources. And examples of those communities that can benefit from planning at those levels are the Fort Morgan area, Point Clear, Montrose, Stapleton, etc. what step is that going to be taken care of under local provisions for those areas?
So there's something in planning called sector plans, and that's like a zoomed up version of a document like this. And it would require something along those lines. It would require funding from our funding to support something of that nature.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Matthew?
All right, Mr. Chairman, final thing here is to note the statute that tells us how this plan's adopted. There's a, it says the Baldwin County Commission shall appoint the Planning Commission to make and maintain in an up-to-date manner a master plan for the physical development of the unincorporated areas of Baldwin County. You can keep reading, but the next highlighted portion, the Planning Commission shall make a preliminary report and hold a public hearing thereon. That's what's going on right now. The master plan recommended thereunder shall be presented in a final report to the Baldwin County Commission. That's what will take place if you all recommend we move forward. The Baldwin County Commission shall not hold a public hearing and take action until it has received the final report of the Planning Commission. So our recommendation is pursuant to Code of Alabama. I'm not going to read the numbers. The Planning and Zoning Commission recommends the Baldwin County Commission adopt the final report of the Baldwin County Master Plan, which includes the markups incorporated by Planning and Zoning staff as presented at this meeting. And I would just note it includes some of those non-substantive clarification things that we discussed as well. And all that will be published in final form before this next public hearing. But it will essentially take all the red lines out of this document and make it one clean final document for the County Commission.
Okay. So the question is, are you ready to make the recommendation to the County Commission? Does anybody need any further discussion on this before we do?
Mr. Chairman, I hate to be
Excuse me?
I hate to be overly concerned about a few things. On the page, and I'm looking for it here, where it lists all of the folks, there seem to be some different, I'm trying to find it here, I beg your pardon, ways of identifying not just the Planning Commission, but some of them identify chairman and vice chairman and some do not. The question there would be, could there be some normalization? Thank you. Some normalization of that as a way to better identify all of these groups.
It's a great question, and you make a good point because that changes from year to year for all these bodies, so we'll probably strike the reference to chair and vice chair under the Planning Commission, unless y'all have an objection to that.
And the other thing that I guess for the Planning Commission, thank you, goes back to the introductory page, and I appreciate the approach, but I still feel somewhat strongly that this is a document for our entire county, and as we move forward with that, it'll be for all of the people, and hopefully, over time, more areas of the county will recognize, just as happened in the last year and a half or 2 years, the importance of being part of the zoned area of the county, with the number of areas that have actually voted to accept participation in that. And I just throw this out to the Planning Commission as to other thoughts about whether we leave the incorporated areas or zoned areas in, or refer to this as a guide to growth in Baldwin County.
Anybody else have any thoughts on that?
Matthew, isn't it mandated by the state for zoned only?
That's correct. We've reviewed this with legal counsel, and it does apply only to the zoned areas, and that's because the only way it applies is through a rezoning application, and you obviously can't do a rezoning in an unzoned area unless they voted in zoning. So again, I do understand Mr. Boer's perspective here. I'm going to actually give a really strong recommendation by staff that we leave it as is, or as marked up, because I think we're all going to look 16 months from now with someone waving that document in the air saying, look, this says it covers all Baldwin County, and of course it will say that somewhere in small text on the inside, but this will say, no, look at the title, and hopefully it'll keep them from having that misunderstanding. And so I think it's important that we do leave it that way, but I defer to the Planning Commission, certainly.
Okay. I'll entertain a motion. If you want to do something other than what we've been recommended by staff, you need to be clear about adding that to your motion, or otherwise just make your motion as per staff's recommendations.
I'll make a motion, we recommend to the Baldwin County Commission to adopt the final report with the Baldwin County Master Plan with markups incorporated by staff.
Okay. Mr. Davis made a motion. We make a recommendation to the County Commission to approve this.
I will second it.
Mr. Mulliken is second the motion. All right, I'm going to make sure we're clear. Any comments or questions on the motion? All in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? All right, motion carries.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman. That was the only item we had on the agenda tonight.
All right. Are there any public comments? I have nothing signed up. Any staff reports?
No, sir.
Legal counsel? Anything? All right, our regular meeting will be April the 6th. We'll see everybody back in. We are adjourned.